All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of The Differential. I've been dying to actually have somebody like my next guest on, which is Mr. John Hickey. He is eco warrior for solar. He is the Missouri State Coordinator for Clean Energy for Joe Biden. He has I believe, and he'll be able to tell us a lot about it here in a minute, a 30-year span of being in this sector and understanding this vertical. So it's going to be unique in that we've had a few folks that have quite a bit of knowledge in the renewable sector on here, but not many people as knowledgeable as John. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jake.
Hey, no problem. So I met you obviously through some unique networking interaction and the gifted people over at LinkedIn. Thank you, LinkedIn, by the way. And walk me through, and my CEO, the gentleman I work for, kind of walked me through a little bit of how he knows you. And Eric, actually, my buddy, knows you. So you're a popular guy in these circles. Talk to me about how you got into this industry.
Well, let me start with the most recent. We obviously just came through a national presidential election.
Correct.
Where we had candidates with very stark differences on clean energy. The incumbent not supporting clean energy, the challenger, Joe Biden, supporting clean energy.
Yes.
And in looking at the election, I saw that we had a real opportunity this cycle because the growth of the clean energy sector has meant that there's a lot more people working in that sector than there ever was before. And that is a political force. If you look at the state of Missouri, last year, the fastest growing job category in the whole state was solar panel installer.
Yes. Followed, I think, I believe that was the number 1 or 2 in the world this year, followed by a turbine installer right behind him, I believe, a wind turbine installation professional. So, yes, that's awesome.
So it's not just a Missouri phenomenon, it's a world phenomenon, but it made me realize, wow, if we could harness the power of all these clean energy workers, that would be a political force that could help create the political support we need to grow the industry.
Correct.
And that was the fundamental idea behind Clean Energy for Biden is saying, let's pull together the clean energy sector, solar, wind, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and really tap that political power in the election. And that was obviously any election victory's got many factors involved, but the clean energy sector was definitely a factor and was one of the key reasons that many voters decided to go with Joe Biden in this election.
Right. And from your background, like as far as what you did prior to working with Biden that made you, was there a passion that existed beyond when you took a look at the landscape and made this move? What drew you to it prior to that, or was there a prior draw?
I came to this really from the environmental side.
Okay.
Previously, I was the Missouri State Director for the Sierra Club and have been involved in environmental organizing over the years. And one thing that became clear to me is that if we don't deal with climate change, then nothing else we do really matters.
Yes.
Look at all the forest fires we've had. People have worked their lives to protect the forests out west, and then this past summer we have these wildfires that just turn them all to ashes in a minute.
Yeah, that's been in fact, this is a big week in a lot of ways, and we're going to get into that in a minute, but one of the biggest, obviously outspoken people in that is Bill Gates, and him and Melinda launched their new book this week, which I believe is titled something to the effect of the biggest crisis in our lifetime. And it outlines the capital investment firm they're working with and the people in which they are coming up with new ways to basically get a zero carbon initiative out there and support companies that are doing so. So this is a huge week for climate change. Plus, hey, it's snowing in Texas
Yeah.
in a big way. So, so yeah, that's definitely. And then here locally, as you know, we voted on some pretty big stuff this week, or we're getting ready to, for our solar folks like myself. So
Exactly. And going back to when I remember being in high school, working with one of my buddies who had built a little wind turbine. And since we were high school kids and we didn't know what and how we were doing, there was no governor on it. So that the thing went round and round so fast, it just flew off into the sky. So we started out inauspiciously, but so for over 40 years, I've been concerned about this space. But one thing that I think is so powerful about clean energy is it brings together several key items. It brings together addressing climate change, which is obviously an existential threat and is critical to supporting our natural world. It also deals with the economy, because we need jobs in this economy. We need good paying, high skilled jobs in this economy. The clean energy sector is a place that's building that.
Yeah. There's an excellent space there right now, and we're fortunate in that. And I specifically, I'm one of those guys. I came from traditional construction and trades and I'm one of the guys that cross-rated or crossed the road and said, hey, I still like to do drywall and finish work, but I'm going to try these panel things over here because it sounds like the future.
Yeah. No, exactly. And then there's a third factor, which is human health. That there was just a report in Forbes magazine this week that said that about 1 out of 5 human deaths across the whole world are connected to air pollution.
Really?
In particular, the small particle air pollution that you get from coal-fired power plants and from diesel vehicles. And that is almost as many human deaths that are caused by cancer across the world. And I know when I'm in Illinois and I'm driving back to the Missouri side and I see the arch, I not only see the arch, I see a big brown haze over St. Louis as I come back, if I'm coming from Chicago, let's say. And I realized, boy, I'm breathing that stuff every day. And that air pollution causes asthma, causes heart attack, it causes stroke. And getting to clean energy solves those problems too. And in fact, today, that is the biggest impact that we're seeing, is that human health impact of air pollution. And it doesn't need to be that way. We can do better than that. We don't have to depend on these outdated technologies.
Correct.
That right now are dominant.
Yeah, I actually, I can't remember what the first name of the author was, but there's a gentleman named Kozal, wrote a book called Savage Inequality, probably a 10-year-old book. It's actually a highlight of how much pollution is right there at that East St. Louis border coming into St. Louis. And not only how it affects, the atmosphere, climate change, which all that is highlighted, but on top of that, how it affects the schools, the children, birth defect rates. I mean, it goes into some pretty nasty statistics that'll give you a real eye-opening moment into how bad it is, that haze you're talking about, what it actually does over there. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and the fellow who was behind the research that just came out in Forbes magazine is a guy named Joel Schwartz. I saw him speak here in St. Louis a couple of years ago. He's an old timer. He's the guy whose research got lead out of gasoline. And
really?
You may not be old enough for this, Jay, but I remember when I was starting out and I drove up into the gas station, they would say leaded or unleaded. They would actually pump your gas, right?
Yeah.
And now that's illegal. You can't sell leaded gasoline because it was a human health disaster, because it spread lead dust all over everywhere, and then got absorbed into children and caused brain damage. So,
yeah, now we're trying to mitigate and get rid of that stuff everywhere, which is still, if you can believe this, an ongoing situation. Yeah, we've still got those on playgrounds, and we're finding it still in buildings and so on and so forth. So we're still fighting that battle.
I'm in a house built in 1915. I'm sure I got lead in this house too. And but thank God we got it out of out of gasoline. And again, that same gentleman, Joel Schwartz, is now focusing his effort on air pollution from dirty energy and saying that is our big opportunity today where we can really improve human health by switching to clean energy sources.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the inspiring things I saw during the 60-minute interview with Bill Gates, which was last week, about his book and his capital side, was the ways in which the world has pulled this cover over our eyes into how we can be, at least we may not be zero carbon, but we can get that footprint way down. And his best example that he had was the concrete company that he works with. They are making concrete without using any kind of coal-powered, dirty energy plant to establish a way to make concrete. Because we don't realize, you don't look at all the materials that go into making a building from a construction standpoint, which is one of the areas he's targeted in a big way. He's trying to target construction and break down materials and how they're made, and then reverse engineer that to find innovators who are then building something that's going to be able to be usable and still create the same kind of solid building structures that we have today, but also in a carbon footprint that's not a third of what it is. So, which is a super fascinating thing. When I watched this guy make concrete, I was like, that's the next level. That's where we need to be in 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at here at the St. Louis metro area, there's a lot of concrete plants. There's the big Wholesome plant on the Mississippi River down in St. Genevieve, one of the biggest concrete plants in the United States. And concrete plants traditionally have used really dirty fuels to fire their process. So this would mean a lot in our area if we could clean up the concrete industry. And I think it shows the opportunities. We've got to clean up transportation, cars and trucks. We got to clean up electricity generation. We got to clean
plastics.
Up,
plastics
concrete.
was
We
huge.
got to clean up steel. There's so many opportunities. And like you say, the technology is, in many cases, it's there today and it's cheaper. Just like it's cheaper to get electricity today from wind than from coal.
Yeah, most of this stuff that they were going over, the different industries, and like I said, one of the two I saw was the concrete industry and the plastic side of it. Plastics is a big one for him. He's passionate about that because there's such an outcry from not only the U.S. community, but the international community that, like, hey, this place that I used to come to, this part of this beach is now just a big funnel of plastic shit everywhere, and it's a nightmare for us, and we don't want it anymore. So those are the two he was really big on, but to your point, there is already technology and capability in place right now, cheaper than it's ever been able to be done. The communication's faster than it's ever been able to be communicated from all over the world to get these innovators in one room and come up with these solutions. And it seems like the general direction, the gist I feel is that everybody is pushing it that way, especially from my generation. I'm in my mid-30s, so we're like, yes, let's go. Let's fix this whole thing.
Yeah, and if you look at, I think that's what you make a great point, that young voters are particularly understand climate change and vote on climate change. So that's a critical constituency.
Yeah.
But even if you look at small towns, you look at rural Missouri, some of the first entities to buy into wind energy in Missouri are these municipal electric utilities in the most rural parts of the state, like West Plains, Missouri.
Yeah.
They can get wind energy cheaper than they can get electricity from coal. And so I think that shows how quickly we can make the transition, because as people understand that clean energy is cheaper, that will accelerate it. But that's where it gets down to politics. Is the
politics of that
industry is going to try and hold on to market share and do whatever they can to close the door to clean energy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm dealing right now as we speak with, and I'm not going to name them, the utility cooperative in Illinois. Mm-hmm. And I've never fought so far, and I mean, I've been installing solar for a little over 3 years now. I've been in the construction industry for almost 10. And in the time I've been in those industries, I've never fought a battle like this one. I mean, they are doing everything they possibly can to block us from doing a ground mount for this gentleman. And it's because they don't want to offer him the metering credits that we can get him through the state of Illinois. They're like, well, that's cool that you can get him his federal X, Y, and Z, but not on this utility cooperative. You're not going to. And they are doing everything they can to red tape us. Oh, can't get that permit? Watch this. We're going to sit on that interconnection permit for 6 months and see if your buyer, and this is where it's kind of sickening. They're hoping, and I found this out just by being in so many AHJ conversations. I'm in those jurisdictional conversations consistently because I'm the guy who usually has to get your permit for you to put in your solar system. And the conversations are literally like, here's the new move. If we can't get you to leave us alone, then we'll hold up XYZ, whether it's an interconnection, a rough-in, whatever it is, any kind of permitting long enough till your buyer loses taste in wanting to have it because it's so aggravating or it's annoying or it's taking too long. I already put $50,000 down to have this built. My God, what's the deal? Mm-hmm. And they hope that you do that because they want you to lose that taste so that you turn around and you start losing customers, which then benefits them on the back end. And there is research towards how this can affect us adversely because they also turn around and become the voice of the community saying, I gave so-and-so energy or so-and-so wind my money, and I told them to do this job. And the jurisdiction said no, so it's probably not going to be a good thing for you to do either, and then that goes around the community, full circle. So it's systemic, and it's terrible, and it's a war we're fighting frontline right now.
Exactly. Another good example from this area is how the coal industry has been fighting to stop a transmission line to bring wind energy from southwest Kansas to Missouri and Illinois, called the Grain Belt Express. And the Grain Belt Express could deliver electricity here to the St. Louis area cheaper than the existing coal plants can deliver it. And so the coal players are saying, well, if we can just stop the transmission line, we don't have to compete and we can keep our monopoly.
Exactly.
And so that becomes a political decision because that's something that the state legislature and the Public Service Commission deal with. And I know in Illinois, there's been a real push. I think it's called the Clean Energy Jobs Act.
The Jobs Act, yeah, CEJA.
And because the clean energy industry is organized in Illinois, you've been able to make some progress. And I know some of the solar companies that previously did most of their work on the Missouri side of the river are now doing most of their work on the Illinois side of the river.
We're one of them.
Because you've been able to get better policy.
It's easier.
On co-op territory.
Yeah, it's easier to have that conversation, especially with the Ameren folks out there. And if you're in Missouri, Illinois, and you're listening, you know what I'm talking about. It's easier to have that conversation with them. The co-ops, because they have that little space, and they own it, and they know it, they know exactly at what points they can choke you and in the whole procedure. Whereas with Ameren, it's a tougher conversation. But yes, Illinois has been a saving grace to those of us in the Midwest who are looking to become more renewable, more energy efficient. They've just figured it out a little faster than Missouri. I think Missouri's on its way, though. I mean, from your perspective, you're on the front line of that battle. Where is Missouri?
Well, I think, like you say, I think Illinois shows what is possible. And you think about it, the sun doesn't shine any more in Illinois than it shines in Missouri. The wind doesn't blow any more in Illinois than it does in Missouri. We're right next to each other. And I think what we're seeing is, for example, with the Grain Belt Express, we're seeing a real expansion of wind energy. The Ameren actually just bought 2 wind farms in Missouri, one up by Kirksville and one over in Atchison County on the Missouri River. And the Liberty, which is in southwest Missouri, just retired its coal plant in Asbury and just opened a wind farm in Barton County. So what we're seeing is the big investor-owned utilities are realizing that clean energy is the future and they got to get on board. and so we're seeing some real improvement on the wind development side. I think solar is lagging though, and I think that's where we have a real opportunity is
Right.
expanding solar, not only uh, residential rooftop, but business rooftops and ground mounted arrays.
We're
And I think,
doing we're doing more of that now than we ever have. We're doing a lot of residential, but our focus has shifted quite a bit to the commercial side. We're having more success there. We're showing the savings faster. And recently we did 2 schools over in Illinois. We did Scott Elementary, which is actually on Scott Air Force Base, and then we also did Wingate Elementary. And by doing that, we gave them a couple things. A, we gave them a system that's going to pay itself off in under a decade, which is insane, and make them energy efficient. But also, we're giving them a teaching tool, which we consistently, one of the things I'm not the salesman for the organization, nor do I want to be. I like being on the construction side. But one of the things we've consistently talked about is if you go to a family or you're talking to a family, especially a group that has younger children, it can be as much about making an investment in that as it can about anything else. You know, the savings are decent. Okay. What about trying to teach them what they're going to have to do over the next 50 years for this whole thing to make sense? You know, the world. I know Wingate and Scott, that was one big thing for them, was that big feeling of togetherness. Like, we're going to use this as a tool. We're going to walk them out to the ground mount. I don't think they're going to shuffle them up to the roof, but there are pictures of how, from the drone setting, how many panels. There's almost 2,000 panels on that roof.
Oh yeah, you
So,
think of all the flat roofs around here. I was up on the roof at the IKEA store in St. Louis, which I believe is the biggest rooftop array on the
yeah,
Missouri side anyway.
we know the developer who did that. He's kind of like this with us. So yeah,
And the facilities manager for IKEA was up there with me, and he was telling me that with as much electricity as they draw, which is a lot because they got a lot of lighted floors uh, in
oh,
their
it's a
store.
huge offset. Yeah,
Yeah, up to 28% of their
wow,
electricity is generated by the solar. But he also said, interestingly enough, the other side of that coin is energy efficiency. And he said that when IKEA built that store, they built it to modern efficiency standards. And he said it takes so much less juice to run that store than other similar buildings he's managed in St. Louis. And I think if you look at the total clean energy workforce, energy efficiency is actually the biggest uh, sector, and it's the cheapest. The cheapest electricity is the electricity you never use. And I think that is also an opportunity, but also is a political challenge because while
right.
states like Illinois have a statewide building code, on the Missouri side of the river, every city and county is on its own. And
Yeah,
most parts of Missouri have a very outdated code.
we're a municipal nightmare over here.
Yeah.
There's just too much. That's going to be a battle as we go on. We're going to end up, I feel like, fighting on a lot of fronts, unless there's some kind of federal legislation that allows us to bypass that. The other thing that's weird about Missouri and Illinois from a solar perspective, and I don't know about wind if they're the same, but the standardization from a rough-in standpoint, building standpoint, they haven't really written the book yet on what is, what's expected, what's perfect, what's not. So I think there's going to be a lot of that in Missouri and Illinois in the future too. Because I'll tell you, we've seen like our company holds a high standard. I know a few, it's not just us. There's quite a few out there that hold a high standard of their building spec. No hanging wires and just general bad craftsmanship. And we've noticed that you go look at another system that was installed 2 years earlier and you're like, oh my gosh, did somebody inspect this before they said this was okay in this municipality? Because the wires are just hanging down on the roof, just sitting there. So you start to realize that you're like, okay, this is a book that has a couple chapters, but it don't have near what it should yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so young as a building practice, it's infant.
Exactly. And you look at some of the current building codes that are coming out now.
It's part of
There's
it.
it's what they call an appendix, a solar ready appendix. It says that where the jurisdiction says if you're building a home or a multifamily residence in our jurisdiction, you've got to have it the wiring set up to make it easier to put on rooftop solar, or
Right.
you've got to have it wired to make it easier to do an electric vehicle plug-in. And that I think that is also a critical step now, because then it saves expense on the back end to try and rig up a connection where the house wasn't built originally to accommodate it.
Correct. Yeah, and one of the things we're doing right now is we're building a hotel down in Eureka on the Missouri side, and it's a system that's on their roof. But another thing that we're actually doing is we're building the EV charger section. So we're laying the concrete and building the EV charger. And this is a forward thinking. If you know the Eureka area, Pacific Eureka,
Sure.
Technologically savvy is not necessarily the words I would associate with that particular region. So
Great.
it's really unique to see a hotel builder come in, build this really lavish hotel, put solar panels on the roof, put an EV charger for multiple spots on the ground. To me, that signals the forward-thinking nature of our business owners in Missouri. So I think it is coming around.
Springfield, talk about like not the center of progressive Missouri, but you go to Springfield and you go to the hotels that Tim O'Reilly has built. He's got solar panels on the roofs.
Yeah.
He builds his hotels to LEED standard.
Yeah, that's awesome.
He's got a gas station on Highway 44 that's got Tesla chargers. So it is interesting to see where there's people who already get it and are moving forward in parts of the Midwest. You wouldn't think that would be happening.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's been really, and it's actually kind of inspiring in a way too. When you're doing the building on the ground, you come to learn a little bit, or you come to gain a little more respect for those guys who are taking the extra time to figure it out, because it's not an easy build. That's something I tell people. I'm like, this is challenging, just not only from a building perspective, which it is that too, but it's also challenging from the AHJ perspective, the municipal requirements perspective, the electrical that has to be tailored almost to make this work. When you work with an electrical contractor, the first time you install solar, you learn a lot. I've learned a ton because of the fact that we work side by side. But again, I think, and I say this from an optimistic standpoint because I'm out there every day doing it, I think we're closer than we ever have been, and probably heading in the right direction.
Yeah, another example of that is if you look at the transit buses in our area, Bi-State is moving to electric buses. Bi-State has bought 18 electric transit buses. And when you think about it, diesel is really dirty, and buses are always running up and down the street. So they're big polluters.
Mm-hmm.
So electrifying diesel transit buses is very helpful in terms of cleaning the air. And the garage that they're using is going to be the garage on Brentwood, which is just down the road from my house. So I've been watching Ameren build a substation next to the Bi-State bus garage to accommodate being able to plug in all these vehicles.
Oh, wow.
And
that's awesome.
So the good thing is it's creating jobs. It's creating jobs in a way that cleans the air in long term, because we're taking diesel off of the road and putting electric on the road. It's better for the bus drivers, because think about it. If you're in the bus 8 hours a day and you're breathing diesel,
you're just breathing diesel. Yeah.
That's no good. It's bad enough if you're a passenger and you're on the bus for an hour, but the bus drivers get the worst of it. So there's a lot of benefits, and it's just the start. It's 18 buses out of 408 buses I think they've got.
Yeah, it's a small percentage. They're doing a test study.
What the Biden administration will do is help transit agencies make that shift in a much quicker way.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things. I mean, when we saw the coal studies, I'm sure you've read those. The guys who are working in coal mines, I was just like, I'm sorry, like roofing, because you're on a roof hanging panels, I'm not going to lie. Glorious, definitely not the word I would use to describe it. It's hotter than hell, and it's sunny, and it's a roof. None of which are fun. I'll admit that. Having said that, if you said, Jay, you can get on a roof and it's going to be 107, or you can go down in a coal mine and get black lung. I'm headed to the roof.
Right.
And I think everybody who does this agrees on that. And when you see some of these guys, 30s, 40s, 50s, just dropping dead from it in pretty good sized numbers, it's a clear sign that it's just not almost morally responsible to keep producing that stuff.
Exactly. And if you look at the coal that's burned in Missouri for electricity, 97% of the coal burned in Missouri comes from Wyoming.
Yeah.
It doesn't come from the deep mines over in southern Illinois. It comes from strip mines in Wyoming. And I guess the upside is you're not getting black lung because you're not underground in the dust, but it also creates very few jobs because you got a few drivers and these big caterpillars that are making doing the mining, and they dump it onto trains with 142 cars, and you got one locomotive driver and he drives it to St. Louis. It creates very few jobs compared to energy efficiency, wind, solar, and that is, I think, important for people who listen to the podcast to know is that moving to clean electricity does not mean that all these people working in the deep mines are going to lose their job. They're not digging for the coal that's burned in the electricity sector. That's strip mines from out west.
Yeah, and well, and like I said, I mean, and that's the other thing too. People think there's a job spectrum that's this big in the solar industry and the wind industry and in a ton of industries that just spin off because of it. There are this many jobs. I mean, there are an astronomical amount of jobs being created. I mean, you have to learn how to become a solar or a PV project manager. It is a whole different spectrum than if you've built a high-rise or a home. It's completely different. The process is nowhere near the same. I can speak to that because I've done both. It's not even close. And I'm certain that it's substantially more difficult when you get into wind. Wind's an incredibly difficult process to build a turbine. And we're finding out that from Texas, that from an engineering perspective, we probably need to look at the temperature efficacy where that lives. You know, I think they thought, hey, we'll go south. It'll be warm. We don't have to worry about these things freezing. And that was a miscalculation.
Oh, exactly. And I think that's why I like to use the term climate disruption instead of global warming, because what's really happening is climate is getting more unpredictable, more floods, but more droughts, and crazy weather patterns like we're seeing in Texas right now. And that is a consequence of climate change. But also what's interesting, I think, in Texas is it's the fossil fuel infrastructure that has failed. It's the natural gas infrastructure that's failed. And that if there was a lot more rooftop solar that people could draw on in Texas today, I think there'd be people lining up for that.
That's the well, and I spoke to a gentleman from a much larger builder that we deal with, and we're actually potentially going to work with him up on the East Coast on a 3 to 5 megawatt project. We got into that conversation 2 days ago, and one thing that stuck out to me was he was like, you know how many people down there right now are moaning and complaining about this whole thing that global warming's not a thing if I'm under snow. And I'm like, well, that's just an incomplete understanding of global warming. That's, that's poor education, which definitely needs to be obviously worked on. But the other thing was the fact that they have not gone and taken a look at, and nobody is focused on this. Watch Fox News. They're the best example of this. They're not focused on frozen natural gas lines, which is happening. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you saw the news over the last 10 days, but everybody has hammered wind and solar.
Right.
Like we are the devil right now, which is hilarious because if you take a look at what's happening down there, Spire has openly admitted we have natural gas lines frozen everywhere. There's press releases all over there. Yeah, they're done. From a standpoint of being able to say we're the most effective and go to natural gas, it works 100% of the time, no questions asked. Throw that campaign out, get a new marketing guy in there, because that's not going to work anymore. And then look at the grids. I mean, they're maxed, with no support, in the future. It opens engineering questions up for us to get better, but it definitely, in my opinion, shifts all the questions out about how effective it can be if we engineer it correctly. Wind, solar, across the board.
I saw an article in the St. Joseph, Missouri newspaper a day or two ago who said a solar installer there was having their phone ring off the hook from people interested in solar because of what they were seeing happening in Texas. So
yeah.
At least there's some people in Northwest Missouri who are putting two and two together and realizing that they want to have a access to energy that doesn't have such a long supply chain. They want to have something that they can count on and that's on their roof. And so hopefully that when the dust settles, the truth will come out and people will realize, well, what we just seen in Texas is an example of how we need to build back better, to steal a line from Joe Biden.
There's a
move to clean energy.
I can't remember the company name, but when I do, I'll share it with you because it's a really cool company name. And if I get a chance, I'll send the research on this podcast. So those of you who tune in, read it. Familiar with your defroster on your car? One of the pieces of technology they're working on right now is trying to figure out how to fit that kind of tech in your home near your inverter for your solar panel. There's been a lot of complaints about, well, snow's on my panel. So I was able to draw, X kW because of it being cloud cover, but it was still something. Now it's nothing because there's snows on my panel and it's covered my panels. Again, this identified a problem. And there's already, and I mean, this is within a few weeks of this snow happening, of us already coming up with very viable solutions. I mean, that's a brilliant solution to put together something like that. How long it takes to get it built and deployed to the market, who knows? That's a hit or miss. But point is I think we sometimes I think folks are looking at this sometimes from the negative angle, like, oh, it's covered in snow, we can't use it, versus saying, like, how do we adjust its functionality to make it a little bit better like we would with our PC?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that's my take on the industry as it stands after Blizzard 2021.
Yeah. But I think as much as people may lose production for a couple days with snow on the roof, in the grand scheme of things, that's going to be a small portion of your annual electricity production, seems to me.
Yeah, almost none. Exactly. And in the light of a 365-day year, I'd say that's this much of the problem. Well, we're getting to the end of our available time, but I wanted to tell you thank you for coming on. And I would love to do a follow-up after, probably like 6 months to a year from now, because I'd like to talk to you a little bit more with all the stuff coming down the pipe, SRACs and legislation and all that stuff. And we have another mutual friend that you've introduced me to now, John, the other John from Vote Solar.
John up with Vote Solar in Chicago.
Yeah. So I spoke to him on the phone for a couple hours the other day. Him, and Paul. Yeah, amazing guy. And I told him, I was like, I want a roundtable, the three of us at some point, and do that, because I think that would be incredibly fun to have that discussion.
And there's so much. Here's one small example, and I know we're coming to the end of our time, but this last election, I was talking to one of the other solar companies here in St. Louis, and they raised a concern that said, well, some of our solar installers may not be able to vote on election day, because if they've got to drive a long way to the job and they get up on the roof, who knows what's going to happen? They might get stuck on the roof, and by the time they get back home, the polls have closed. What are we going to do? And so what we figured out is there was a location just down the road from the solar company's warehouse where you could vote early absentee in person. And so what they did is, after the staff meeting, people who wanted to vote early absentee just went right down the road and did it. And I think they've got, 50 or 60 workers. And that's an example of the importance of the clean energy workforce getting a chance to speak out and having the information to know how to vote and how to participate. And I think that's the kind of stuff that Vote Solar and John Delury work on too, is making sure that the clean energy workforce gets heard at the ballot box.
Yeah, and we have a pretty strong policy at our place. Not only do we encourage the employees to make sure that they're off at the polls voting, because it's so important at this point, but we also, like, recently in our internal channel, we actually send out the current legislation. We want you to reach out to your rep. We want you to talk to them. We want you to email them. Everything. If you're going to be in this, and that's kind of the thing, when I talk to guys that are getting ready to come on to my crew to build large commercial or mid-sized residential projects, that's kind of what it's almost a prerequisite. I'm like, if you don't really care about this in some way, shape, or form, I mean, if you're great at what you do, I'm not saying I won't hire you, but I'm saying that it's going to be hard to justify some really hot, hard days on a roof if you don't give a damn about what we're doing here. So if the mission isn't important, then it ain't going to probably work.
And those folks are the best messengers. It's one thing for somebody like me to say, oh yeah, solar's great. But for somebody to say, well, that's actually my day job. And I know it's great because I've been on a roof all day and my company has X number of employees and this is my livelihood. That person gets much more credibility than somebody like me. And I think those are the voices that we need to hear. And that, again, that by being politically organized, we can make sure that those voices are what people hear on the radio, on television, in the newspaper, because those are the voices that are going to really persuade the people who are confused.
Right. Absolutely. I always ask one funny question at the end, or just an oddball question. Here's my fun one. What's your thoughts on Perseverance? We now have a rover on Mars.
I was thinking first you were thinking Perseverance generally, and as an old man, I try and persevere.
Some wisdom. Yeah, there you go.
But I think they're going to need somebody else to volunteer to move to Mars.
Yes.
I'm going to let one of the young people like you do that one.
Yeah, I don't think I'm not ready to leave this one just yet. So, and yeah, I'm not interested. I mean, knock on wood, next generation, look out, if they think they can get up there and hack it, good for them.
Yeah, I'd rather be floating on the 11 point than scuffling around in the red sand under the blazing.
Yeah, negative 81 at night is not my thing. Well, John, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on, especially on such short notice, and embracing us with some wisdom. And like I said, I look forward to. I'm going to get that roundtable together. I definitely want to have you back.
Thanks, and thanks for the time, Jason, and thanks for doing the show.
No problem. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.